Overtime? Only if you can keep up with me. She's the boss, confident, magnetic, and he can't stop noticing her. But can desire survive the rules of the office? The office smelled faintly of coffee and polished wood, a quiet hum of computers and printers filling the background like a steady heartbeat. I arrived early, hoping to get a head start on the day's workload, though truthfully, I was nervous. New projects, new expectations, and now, her. She was already there, leaning over a stack of documents on her desk. She moved with a kind of effortless grace that made even the simplest action, straightening a file, adjusting a pen, look deliberate and almost hypnotic. The sunlight through the blinds caught the subtle curve of her hair, and for a moment, I felt an odd mix of admiration and nervous anticipation. She was confident, composed, undeniably attractive, but not in an overbearing way. There was a warmth under her poise that made her approachable, yet slightly untouchable. Our eyes met briefly across the office, and she smiled, just a small, knowing twitch at the corner of her lips, but it was enough to make my chest tighten. Her gaze held a hint of amusement, a silent challenge that seemed to say, "Are you ready for this?" I looked down quickly, pretending to focus on my laptop, though my fingers trembled slightly as I typed. She moved closer, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. Each step seemed measured, confident, yet somehow teasing. When she handed me a set of documents, her fingers brushed mine lightly, just enough to send a ripple of awareness through me. The warmth lingered longer than expected, and I caught a faint scent of her perfume, subtle but intoxicating, something floral with a hint of something earthy. My mind wavered between professional composure and a sudden, dizzying curiosity. "Think you can handle this?" she asked, tilting her head slightly, her voice smooth and low, carrying that teasing undertone that made the words feel like a challenge rather than a simple question. My mouth went dry. I nodded, muttering something that sounded like confidence, though I doubted it came out clearly. I watched as she returned to her desk, the sway of her hair and the gentle rhythm of her movements etching themselves into my memory. Every glance she gave me felt deliberate, but not overt, subtle enough that I wasn't sure if it was real, or if my mind was reading too much into it. There was a tension in the air, delicate and electric, like the faint buzz before a summer storm. For the first time, I felt that working late, staying sharp, giving my all, none of it was just about the job anymore. There was an unspoken element, an intangible draw I couldn't ignore. She was the kind of person whose presence demanded attention, and I realized with a start that I wanted to rise to the challenge, whatever it might mean. The day stretched on, and every time she walked past my desk, I felt that same pulse of nervous anticipation. A stray glance, a quiet laugh shared over a document, the subtle brush of our hands, all small, fleeting, yet enough to make my chest tighten with a strange, delicious tension. This was more than just a workplace dynamic, it was the first spark of something quietly, undeniably alive. By the time I left the office, my mind was a whirl of professional focus and personal distraction, and I found myself wondering, not for the first time, that simple, teasing question she had left me with, "Think you can handle this?" The next few days at the office carried a quiet, electric undertone. Tasks and deadlines blurred together, but every interaction with her seemed to linger a little longer in my mind. I tried to focus, but even routine assignments felt heightened in her presence, as if the air itself had changed. She had a way of entering a room that shifted everything, soft yet commanding, warm yet teasing, and I found myself acutely aware of every glance, every subtle gesture. It started with small challenges. A spreadsheet she handed me, a client email she asked me to draft, innocuous tasks on the surface, but with a knowing look that made me second-guess every keystroke. There was a playful undertone in her voice, a subtle smirk that accompanied instructions, and I realized she was watching not just my work, but my reactions. Her amusement was quiet, almost imperceptible, but it hit me like a ripple under calm water, sudden, stirring, impossible to ignore. One afternoon, she leaned over my desk to correct a formatting error. The proximity was enough to make my pulse accelerate. Her shoulder brushed mine lightly, a soft warmth that seemed to linger. The faint scent of her perfume, earthy, floral, wafted past my senses, and I had to consciously slow my breathing. Her fingers hovered over mine for a moment as she adjusted the document, and I caught the quiet steadiness of her touch. That single, brief contact sent a strange thrill through me, a reminder that there was something unspoken simmering beneath the surface. "Not bad," she murmured with a small, approving smile, almost as if she were sharing a secret only I could understand. The compliment made me flush. I wanted to keep impressing her, to rise to whatever invisible challenge she had set, but I also felt the weight of hesitation. Was I reading too much into this? Or was she deliberately teasing me, aware of the effect she had? Her playful teasing extended beyond work tasks. A comment here, a shared laugh there, always laced with subtle double meanings that kept me on edge. Once, she leaned against the edge of my desk, casually stretching, and said, "I hope you're keeping up." Her gaze held mine, sharp yet warm, and I felt the tension between us thicken. I nodded, trying to match her confidence, though my chest tightened with the effort. Every small interaction was a dance of near-touch and lingering looks. Even during casual moments, passing in the hallway, reaching for the same folder, or laughing over an inside joke, the atmosphere was charged. My mind replayed these moments endlessly, the brush of her hand, the way her lips curved when amused, the soft timbre of her voice when she spoke directly to me. It wasn't just attraction, it was a sense of being noticed, of being measured against a quiet, confident standard that both intimidated and exhilarated me. By the end of the week, I realized that the challenge wasn't just about the work. It was about her, her presence, her attention, and the subtle, playful tension she had begun to weave around me. I wanted to rise to it, to keep up, and yet I also felt the thrill of uncertainty. Every glance, every brush of contact, left me both restless and exhilarated. And all the while, the question lingered in my mind, "Think you can handle this?" The answer, I found, was no longer about spreadsheets or deadlines, it was about her, and the quiet, impossible pull she had on me. By the middle of the week, the subtle tension between us had become something I could no longer ignore. Every glance, every shared laugh, every accidental brush of hands lingered in my mind long after the office lights dimmed. I started noticing details I hadn't before, the faint warmth of her wrist when she handed me a coffee mug, the soft shift of her posture when she leaned close to explain a complex task, the quiet way her eyes would track me across the room as if she were measuring something deeper than my competence. I began to question myself. Was this professional admiration, or something more? The age difference should have made it simple. She was my boss, experienced and confident, while I was still learning my place, but the magnetic pull she exerted complicated everything. I wanted to dismiss it as fleeting infatuation, yet every time I saw her smile, just slightly, just for me, I felt something undeniable stir inside. One late afternoon, I found her alone in the office, leaning back in her chair with a weary sigh. The sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting soft lines across her face, highlighting the faint tension around her eyes. She looked less like the untouchable figure of authority I'd admired from afar, and more like someone quietly carrying the weight of her own struggles. It was a rare glimpse of vulnerability, and it made my chest tighten in a way that startled me. I hesitated before speaking, unsure if it was my place to comment, but the words tumbled out anyway. "Rough day." My voice sounded foreign in my own ears, tentative, uncertain, but caring. She looked at me, and for a moment, her usual confident mask softened. "Yes," she admitted, her fingers brushing her temple as if to massage away the tension. "Deadlines, meetings, sometimes it feels like I'm running on empty." Her voice was quiet, almost fragile, yet there was an honesty in it that made me lean closer, unconsciously, just to be near her. I noticed the faint tremor in her hand as she reached for her mug, the way her shoulders slumped slightly, and I wanted, more than anything, to offer some comfort. The moment stretched between us, charged with unspoken emotion. I wanted to say something, anything, that would bridge the gap between professional decorum and the warmth I felt building inside me. Instead, I reached out gently, resting my hand near hers on the desk. Not touching yet, just close enough that the proximity carried its own quiet reassurance. She noticed, and her gaze flickered to my hand, lingering just a moment longer than necessary before returning to me. It was a delicate balance of restraint and connection. Neither of us crossed the line, yet the tension simmered, unspoken but undeniable. I realized then that the attraction I'd tried to dismiss as curiosity or admiration was something more complex, a desire to be near her, to understand her, to share in these rare, fleeting moments of vulnerability. Leaving the office that evening, I felt a strange mixture of exhilaration and apprehension. The spark had deepened into something that demanded attention, and I couldn't ignore it. But I also knew I had to tread carefully. The lines between professional boundaries, personal desire, and emotional honesty were blurred, and the consequences of misstep were clear. And yet, despite my hesitation, I couldn't stop replaying the memory of her softened expression, the quiet vulnerability that peeked through her confident exterior. The more I thought about it, the more I realized, the challenge wasn't just about keeping up with her professionally anymore. It was about navigating something far more intricate, an emotional closeness neither of us fully understood yet, but both of us felt growing stronger with every passing day. It was one of those quiet evenings when the office felt suspended in time, the hum of the fluorescent lights blending with the soft whir of computers, the city outside glowing through the windows in a muted amber. Most people had gone home, but she was still there, moving around with the same effortless confidence I'd come to notice. And now, it seemed, I wasn't just observing, I was part of her plan. "Looks like you'll be staying late," she said casually, leaning against the edge of my desk. Her gaze held that familiar spark of challenge, and I felt it like an electric current running straight to my chest. The words were simple, almost mundane, but the way she said them, soft, teasing, just on the edge of provocative, made it impossible to treat it as ordinary. I swallowed, trying to hide the surge of anticipation. I can handle it," I managed, my voice slightly steadier than I felt. She smiled, tilting her head, a faint laugh in her eyes. "Only if you can keep up with me." And with that, she moved to the project board, showing me the task list for the evening. It was challenging, detailed, and demanding, but more than that, it was an excuse for us to be in this shared, charged space. We worked side by side, the air between us thick with unspoken awareness. Every time she leaned over to point at a section of a spreadsheet, the soft warmth of her shoulder brushed against mine. I felt it, the heat, the slight pressure, the subtle intimacy of proximity, and it made my focus waver in the most delicious way. Her presence was magnetic. I wanted to concentrate, but all my attention kept snapping to the way her fingers hovered over mine as she corrected an entry, or how her hair brushed my arm when she shifted to reach for a file. She noticed, of course. That knowing smile, that playful flicker in her eyes, told me she was aware of the effect she had on me. "Careful," she whispered, leaning closer than necessary to explain a formula. Her breath brushed my ear, soft and warm, and my chest tightened involuntarily. The office lights caught the gentle slope of her cheek as she spoke, the faint curve of her lips forming a subtle, teasing expression. Even the mundane became charged with tension. Reaching for a pen together, laughing over a minor error, sharing notes across the table, all of it felt intimate, heightened by the quiet, empty office and the lingering shadows around us. Every interaction, every movement, felt amplified. It was as if the world had shrunk to the small space where we existed, alone and acutely aware of each other. Hours passed, and yet neither of us seemed to mind the lateness. The work, challenging though it was, became secondary to the rhythm of our closeness, the small touches, the fleeting glances, the teasing banter that kept the tension alive. I realized with a start that I wanted to keep up, not just with the project, but with her, her energy, her sharpness, her playful dominance that pushed me to be better, to notice her more, to match her in this subtle game. By the time we finally leaned back, stretching and letting out quiet laughs at our mutual fatigue, I felt something undeniable. The overtime challenge had become more than work, it was a shared experience, a slow dance of proximity, teasing, and awareness. I caught her glance, and in it, there was approval, amusement, and a quiet acknowledgement of something deeper simmering between us. And as I gathered my notes, ready to leave the office, I knew one thing with absolute clarity: keeping up with her wasn't just about the job anymore, it was about keeping pace with the pull she had on me, a pull I had no desire to resist. The office felt quieter than usual that evening, the usual hum of activity replaced by a soft, almost reverent stillness. The city lights outside painted golden streaks across the floor-to-ceiling windows, their glow blending with the faint warmth of the overhead lamps. It was the kind of quiet that invited honesty, a moment that demanded reflection, and she seemed to sense it, too. We had been working side by side for hours, tackling the final stages of the project. The laughter and playful teasing from earlier had given way to a calm, focused rhythm, punctuated by the occasional glance that lingered just a heartbeat too long. The playful tension had shifted into something softer, deeper, a quiet understanding that stretched across the small space between us. She leaned back in her chair, the weight of the day evident in the subtle slump of her shoulders. Her eyes, usually sharp and commanding, held a softness that made me pause. "Sometimes," she said quietly, almost to herself, "it feels like no matter how much I do, it's never quite enough." The words caught me off guard. For the first time, I saw past her confident exterior to the person beneath, the woman who carried expectations, pressures, and vulnerabilities she rarely let anyone witness. I felt an unexpected ache of empathy and a strange urge to offer comfort, to somehow bridge the gap between us with something as simple as presence. "Hey," I said softly, leaning just a little closer, careful not to crowd her, "you're doing more than enough." "Really?" My voice felt tentative, but sincere. She looked at me, and there was a flicker of surprise, then a slow, almost imperceptible smile, the kind that softened the sharp edges of her usual poise. Her hand moved almost unconsciously, brushing against mine as she reached for a pen. The contact was light, fleeting, yet it sent a ripple of warmth straight to my chest. I didn't move away, somehow, it felt natural, necessary. We fell into a quiet rhythm, speaking in hushed tones about deadlines, ambition, and the pressures that came with her role. I listened, truly listened, and in doing so, felt a closeness I hadn't anticipated. Her voice, usually confident and commanding, wavered just slightly when she spoke of past failures and the weight of expectations. It was human, it was real, and it made her presence all the more magnetic. At one point, our hands brushed again, this time, lingering a fraction longer. I felt the subtle warmth of her skin, the steady pulse beneath her touch, and the quiet intimacy of the gesture made the room shrink around us. We didn't speak, but the silence carried more meaning than words could convey. There was trust in that moment, and an unspoken acknowledgement of the tension that had been building since day one. By the time we wrapped up the work for the evening, the office no longer felt like just a space for tasks and deadlines. It had become a place where unspoken feelings could breathe, where the distance between professional decorum and personal desire blurred just enough to create something quietly electric. As I gathered my things, I noticed her watching me, a small, almost shy smile playing on her lips. For the first time, I realized that the connection between us wasn't just playful or competitive, it was something deeper, something that demanded patience, attention, and careful nurturing. And in that awareness, I felt both exhilaration and a quiet, grounding warmth. The day ended not with a dramatic revelation, but with a subtle, lingering understanding. The spark between us had grown into a quiet flame, and neither of us could ignore it anymore. The days that followed felt charged in a way I couldn't quite explain. The office hadn't changed, same desks, same hum of computers, same fluorescent lights, but everything between us had shifted. The playful teasing and quiet glances had grown heavier with meaning, a delicate tension that hovered between us like a charged current, waiting for the smallest spark to ignite it. It began with subtle moments. A hand brushing against mine as she handed over a file, her fingers lingering just long enough to make me aware of her warmth. A quiet laugh shared across the room over a minor mistake, her eyes locking with mine a fraction longer than necessary. Even sitting across from her in a meeting, I found myself acutely aware of the curve of her lips, the tilt of her head, and the faint, almost imperceptible shifts in her posture that suggested she noticed me noticing her. There was a push and pull to every interaction now. She maintained her authority, her confidence, her poise, but she also let moments of softness slip through. A fleeting smile here, a teasing comment there, a glance that seemed to linger just long enough to make my pulse quicken. I tried to remain professional, tried to focus on my work, but the energy between us was impossible to ignore. Each near touch, each subtle smile, each whispered word seemed to draw me closer even as it reminded me of the boundaries we couldn't cross. One evening, we found ourselves working on a project late again. The office was quiet except for the soft hum of the computer and the occasional shuffle of papers. She leaned over to point out a detail on the screen, her shoulder brushing mine lightly. The contact was brief, fleeting, yet it sent a ripple of awareness straight through me. I felt her breath near my ear as she spoke, warm and soft, carrying that teasing undertone that had become impossible to ignore. We exchanged quiet jokes, smiles, and the occasional playful challenge, each moment carrying layers of meaning beneath the surface. Every gesture, every look, every fleeting touch seemed amplified in the stillness of the office. I could feel the tension coiling, restrained yet insistent, a magnetic pull neither of us could deny. Even outside of work, these moments followed me. In my mind, I replayed the way she had brushed a stray hair from my forehead, the warmth of her hand as she gestured toward a document, the gentle sway of her movements that had become memorized in my memory. It wasn't just attraction, it was a slow, insistent building of connection, a draw toward her that was both exhilarating and dangerous in its subtlety. Yet, despite the intensity, there was restraint. We didn't cross the lines that might have complicated everything, but the restraint made the moments between us even more charged. Every laugh, every glance, every fleeting touch became meaningful, laden with a desire neither of us fully articulated but both felt. By the end of the evening, I realized something undeniable: the pull between us had grown stronger, the tension more exquisite. It wasn't just about work anymore. It was about being near her, about understanding her, about navigating this delicate, thrilling line between professional respect and something far more intimate. And in that quiet, lingering awareness, I knew one thing with certainty: the closeness we shared, restrained though it was, had become impossible to ignore, and neither of us wanted it to be. The office had emptied, leaving only the soft hum of computers and the distant glow of city lights spilling through the windows. The late-night quiet, once just a backdrop for deadlines and paperwork, now felt like a private stage for something entirely different, a moment suspended in time, fragile yet electric. We had finished the final project together, the last of the spreadsheets and reports neatly filed away. There was a softness in the air now, a quiet that allowed us to simply exist in the space between us. She leaned against the edge of my desk, her posture relaxed for the first time that evening, the usual sharpness of authority softened by exhaustion and something more intimate. For a long moment, we just looked at each other. The playful teasing, the subtle touches, the long glances, all of it had led here. Her eyes held that same spark of challenge, yes, but now it was tempered with warmth and understanding, a quiet acknowledgement of everything unspoken between us. "You did well tonight," she said softly, her voice carrying the same gentle cadence that had drawn me in from the start. Her words were simple, yet they resonated far deeper than any compliment about work ever could. "Thanks," I replied, feeling a rare courage settle over me. I couldn't have done it without you." My hand moved almost unconsciously, brushing against hers as I handed her the final folder. The contact was light, deliberate, and she didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers lingered against mine, a small, reassuring weight that spoke volumes without a single word. There was a pause, the kind that stretches and thickens with meaning. Her gaze softened, and she leaned slightly closer, just enough for our shoulders to brush. I could feel the subtle warmth radiating from her, the quiet steadiness of her presence grounding me even as it stirred something deeper. Every worry, every hesitation from the past days melted into the hum of shared understanding. "You've changed the way I see this office," she murmured, almost to herself. Her hand lightly rested on the edge of the desk near mine, close but not imposing, and the gesture carried an intimacy that felt both safe and exhilarating. I realized then that the attraction, the playful teasing, the lingering touches, they weren't fleeting. They had grown into something substantial, quietly transformative. We shared a quiet laugh, a moment of ease that broke the lingering tension of previous days. I noticed the soft curve of her lips, the warmth in her eyes, and the subtle rise and fall of her shoulders as she exhaled. It wasn't a dramatic gesture, no declarations or confessions were needed. It was enough to be near her, to feel her presence, to share that small, delicate closeness. As I gathered my things to leave, our hands brushed again, this time lingering slightly longer. I caught her glance, a small, knowing smile touching her lips, and I understood that the pull between us had shifted from tension to quiet connection. There was no rush, no urgency, just the promise of something slowly, beautifully unfolding. Stepping out into the cool night air, I felt a warm certainty. The spark that had started with playful teasing and subtle touches had grown into a gentle, enduring flame. And while the world outside the office continued on as usual, we had found a private, unspoken understanding, closeness, trust, and a quiet, shared affection that would guide the next chapter of both our lives. The challenge had never been about deadlines or work. It had been about each other, and now, we were ready to keep up, together. Sparkles, if you felt the tension, the playful teasing, and the quiet connection between them, don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more slow-burn romance stories. Share your thoughts in the comments. Who do you think will keep up with love next?